Vivian Blackwood, what are you doing on my property? These are HOA exclusive containers. Dan, leave immediately or you'll be fined.
She's barking orders at me like I'm the intruder, right on my 40-acre family ranch. This is the land my grandfather devoted decades to, raising cattle and building our family's legacy. No agreement, no notice, no compensation. 18 months ago, she dumped 15 rusted containers across my pasture, barred me from half my inheritance, and fined me every time I objected. Last night's storm tore them open. What spills across my grass isn't the simple storage she promised. It's something far darker. Clear evidence of serious crime she's concealed by hijacking my land as her cover. She humiliated me, treated me like the criminal on my own property. I stayed quiet, watched, documented every violation. Now her secrets are exposed, and justice is coming. What would you do if your family legacy became a crook's hiding spot? Let me take you back 18 months to when this nightmare started. I'm Ezra Thompson, 52 years old, third-generation rancher here in Millbrook Springs, Colorado. This 40-acre spread has been in my family since my grandfather bought it in 1952, with hands that knew real work and a dream of raising cattle under these endless mountain skies. The morning coffee tastes different now. Used to be I'd sit on this porch, listening to cattle lowing in the mist, breathing air that smelled of pine and honest hay. Now there's always the metallic tang of something that doesn't belong. My wife Sarah died of cancer in 2021, leaving you with twin daughters, Emma and Grace, 14 then, 16 now, and a promise I made at her bedside. This ranch would pay for their college, their futures, everything we dreamed of building together. I make my living running electrical jobs around the county, but this land is everything. Millbrook Springs used to be a place where neighbors helped neighbors, and the biggest controversy was whose turn it was to fix the church roof. Old farming families like the Hendersons and Garcias had been here for generations, working the land and respecting what came before. Then came the developers in 2020, drawn like vultures to our mountain views and rustic charm. Pinnacle Heights rose from our valley like a bad rash. Luxury homes for people who wanted to live in the country, but hated everything country about it. The clicking of designer stiletto heels on asphalt announced their queen before I ever saw her face. Vivian Blackwood, 58, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, silver Escalade that probably cost more than most people's houses, and a wardrobe of designer athleisure that screamed money without purpose. This woman had been a Denver City planning commissioner, which explained her obsession with regulations and her talent for finding obscure rules to weaponize. Her voice could shatter glass when she got excited about property values and community standards, which was every conversation involving anything that existed before 2020. The new residents rallied around her like disciples. Within a month, she'd filed noise complaints about my roosters crowing at dawn. Roosters, on a ranch, doing what roosters have done since God invented mornings. But noise complaints were just her opening move. She excavated some forgotten township ordinance from 1962 about agricultural setbacks. My barn, the one my grandfather built with his own hands in 1954, suddenly violated a 50-foot property line rule that had never been enforced in living memory. Daily fines of $500 until I remediated the violation. The musty smell of legal documents filled my kitchen as lawyers explained my options. My small-town attorney took one look at Vivian's Denver legal team and basically told me to start writing checks or lose everything. $15,000 for a sound barrier fence that made my property look like a minimum security prison. I went into debt just to keep breathing on my own land. Then came the barn relocation demand. More lawyers, more threats. My daughters watched their college fund evaporate in legal fees, while I fought a woman who had infinite resources and a personal vendetta against anything that reminded her she lived in farm country. I was staring at bankruptcy when Vivian knocked on my door with her generous solution. Pinnacle Heights residents were renovating their luxury homes, adding wine cellars, home theaters, guest houses. They needed temporary storage space for furniture, appliances, construction materials. The HOA would pay me $800 monthly to lease 5 acres for emergency storage of household items and construction materials. Under federal law, property owners can be held liable for environmental crimes committed on their land, even without knowledge. Always investigate what people want to store on your property. Ignorance isn't a legal defense. The contract felt official between my calloused fingers, all legal letterhead and clauses that seemed legitimate. $800 monthly would cover my mortgage and save my family's legacy. But environmental criminals love having a legitimate front for their operations. I signed that paper thinking I was saving my daughter's future, not knowing I just handed a mastermind the perfect cover for the biggest environmental fraud our county had ever seen. The first container arrived on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after I signed that contract. I watched from my kitchen window as a massive semi rumbled up my driveway, diesel exhaust black against the Colorado blue sky. The driver maneuvered a 20-foot shipping container onto what used to be my best pasture, like he was parking a car. 1 container. That seemed reasonable for temporary storage. By Friday, there were 6. Expansion of storage needs, as outlined in Section 12 of your agreement, Vivian explained when I called, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I pulled out my copy and found the fine print I'd missed. Storage requirements may increase to meet community demands. Community demands. Right. The containers kept coming like a steel invasion. Industrial trucks tore ruts through grass my grandfather had carefully cultivated for 70 years, leaving scars in the earth that looked like wounds. The drivers never made eye contact, just dropped their cargo and rumbled away, leaving behind the acrid smell of diesel and the metallic screech of hydraulic lifts. By the end of month 1, 15 shipping containers sat on my land like steel tombstones in a graveyard that used to be paradise. But it wasn't just the number that bothered me. These weren't standard storage containers. Someone had modified them with ventilation systems, electrical connections, and what looked like climate control units. The constant humming of machinery filled the air where cattle used to graze peacefully, a mechanical drone that made my teeth ache. My electrical contractor instincts kicked in hard. 20 years of wiring commercial buildings had taught me to recognize industrial-grade modifications, and these containers were equipped like laboratory facilities. I remembered reading about a case in Nevada where a contractor got slammed with massive fines because someone modified storage units on his property without permits. Both the modifier and the property owner ended up liable for every code violation. Late-night deliveries became my new normal. I'd wake to the rumble of trucks at 2 a.m., their headlights sweeping across my bedroom walls like prison searchlights. The deliveries always happened in darkness, which struck me as mighty odd for household items and construction materials. Last time I checked, people don't move their dining room sets at 3 in the morning. I started keeping a notebook by my bed, documenting every delivery time, every license plate I could make out in the darkness. Old military habits die hard. When something doesn't feel right, you gather intelligence first and ask questions later. The leather cover grew soft under my fingers as weeks of suspicious activity filled page after page. That's when I made the discovery that changed everything. While checking why my electric bill had doubled, I traced the power lines and found something that made my blood run cold. Someone had illegally tapped into my main electrical feed, drawing massive amounts of power without any meter or permit. Professional-grade work, too. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Not only was I providing free storage space, I was unknowingly paying hundreds of dollars monthly to power their mystery operation. The audacity hit me like a slap in the face. These people weren't just using my land, they were stealing my electricity and making me pay for the privilege of being robbed. That's when I decided to get serious about surveillance. My electrical contractor skills proved more valuable than Vivian could have imagined. I installed trail cameras disguised as routine farm equipment, positioning them to capture every angle of the container operation. Motion sensors hidden in fence posts, a wireless network that fed directly to servers in my basement, recording everything 24/7. If Vivian wanted to play games with fine print, I'd document every dirty move she made. The smell of coffee mixed with ozone from my electronics setup as I reviewed the first week of footage. What I saw confirmed every suspicion crawling up my spine. This wasn't household storage. Heavy machinery, unloaded industrial drums marked with symbols I recognized from electrical safety training, biohazard warnings, toxic material labels, corrosive substance indicators. Workers in full hazmat suits handled containers like they were transporting plutonium. These weren't soccer moms storing their seasonal decorations. But Vivian's control tactics were just warming up. Within days of my surveillance installation, coded locks appeared on every container overnight. enhanced security measures, according to the notice she posted on my own property without permission. Signs went up declaring private HOA storage, authorized personnel only, in bold red letters that felt like slaps across my face. Security patrols started making rounds. Guards with uniforms and radios who treated me like an intruder when I walked my own property. The crunch of gravel under their boots at 3 a.m. became my new alarm clock, a constant reminder that I'd somehow lost control of half my inheritance to a woman in designer workout clothes. "You can't restrict my access to my own property," I told Vivian during one heated phone call, my voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Actually, Section 15 of our agreement grants the HOA exclusive access rights to the storage area during the lease period," she replied, that same fake sweetness making my skin crawl. "For safety and security purposes, of course. Safety and security, on my own damn land." But here's what Vivian didn't count on. 3 generations of Thompson stubbornness and 20 years of electrical contractor problem-solving skills working together like a perfect storm. I stayed quiet, smiled when she drove by in her silver Escalade, and kept documenting everything, because something about this operation stank worse than my cattle pen on the hottest day of summer. The legal warfare started 3 months in, when Vivian called an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but word travels fast in a small town. She'd produced photographs of me trespassing on the storage area, walking on my own damn property, and claimed I'd violated our contract by attempting to access secured HOA facilities. The musty smell of legal documents filled my kitchen again, as her Denver lawyers delivered another stack of threats. This time, they wanted an additional $2,000 monthly for enhanced security measures to prevent my continued violations. $2,000. On top of the $800 they were supposedly paying me, which had mysteriously shrunk to $400 after administrative fees and maintenance costs appeared like magic in their accounting. "You can't unilaterally change our contract," I told Vivian during a phone call that left my ears ringing from her shrill voice. "Section 18 allows for security modifications based on demonstrated need," she replied, smooth as snake oil. "Your repeated violations have created that need." Repeated violations. On land my grandfather bought with honest sweat and determination. While Vivian played legal games, I was building something that would have impressed military intelligence. My electrical contractor skills proved invaluable for installing professional-grade surveillance disguised as routine farm equipment. Motion sensors inside fake fence posts, wireless cameras hidden in birdhouses, so authentic they fooled actual robins into nesting nearby. The crunch of gravel under my boots became a familiar sound as I made my rounds, checking equipment and positioning new cameras. Every angle covered, every delivery route monitored, every midnight conversation captured in crystal clear audio. That's when I started seeing things that made my blood run cold. The footage revealed workers in full hazmat suits, unloading industrial drums marked with symbols that triggered memories from electrical safety courses, biohazard warnings, toxic material labels, corrosive substance indicators that meant, "This will dissolve human tissue on contact." I'd read about a demolition company in Arizona that faced $70,000 in daily EPA fines for improper hazardous waste storage. Environmental violations don't just bankrupt you. They can land you in federal prison faster than tax evasion. But the real breakthrough came when I started cross-referencing license plates from surveillance footage with public records. The same trucks making midnight deliveries were registered to Mountain Peak Demolition LLC, owner Robert Blackwood, Vivian's husband. The pieces clicked together like a lock opening in my mind. Mountain Peak specialized in luxury renovation and hazardous material removal, with premium pricing for environmentally responsible disposal. Their glossy website promised EPA-compliant handling of asbestos, lead paint, and contaminated materials. Clients paid upward of $50,000 per project for proper disposal. Except there was no proper disposal. They were dumping everything on my property for free and pocketing the entire disposal fee. Pure profit built on environmental crime and my family's stolen land. My cameras captured the entire operation in detail that would make federal prosecutors salivate. Workers unloading drums of industrial solvents, bags of asbestos insulation torn from million-dollar homes, containers of lead paint chips that belonged in specialized hazardous waste facilities, not cattle pastures. I counted deliveries from 23 different renovation projects over 3 months. If they were charging $50,000 per project and disposing of nothing, we were looking at over $1 million in fraud. Then Vivian made the mistake that would destroy her. During one security patrol, my cameras captured her directing workers to relocate suspicious containers for optimal concealment. Her voice carried clearly across the morning air as she barked orders about positioning materials where they won't be visible from the road. She wasn't just providing storage space, she was actively managing a criminal enterprise. But the personal cost was devastating my family. Emma came home from school with tear stains on her cheeks after classmates called me the garbage man during lunch. Grace got excluded from study groups because hosting them at the toxic dump wasn't acceptable to Pinnacle Heights parents. My electrical contracting business was hemorrhaging clients. Anonymous online reviews claimed I created safety hazards and did substandard work. Projects I'd spent months bidding suddenly went to competitors who whispered about my questionable associations. The bitter irony made my stomach churn. The woman destroying my reputation was using my land for environmental crimes that could trigger federal RICO charges. But every insult, every lost contract, every tear my daughters shed just fueled my determination. I was building a case so airtight that when I finally struck, Vivian's entire world would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. The smell of ozone from surveillance equipment mixed with morning coffee as I reviewed footage each dawn, archiving evidence that would eventually expose the biggest environmental fraud our county had ever seen. I stayed quiet and kept documenting, because when you're hunting wolves, you don't howl until you're ready to bite. And I was getting very close to being ready. 6 months in, Vivian decided to go nuclear. She extended the storage lease unilaterally for another 2 years, claiming the original contract allowed automatic renewal based on ongoing community needs. Then she installed a 10-foot security fence that completely blocked my access to half my own property. The metallic clang of fence posts being driven into my grandfather's soil felt like nails in a coffin. Workers in Mountain Peak uniforms erected barriers that turned my ranch into a prison camp, complete with razor wire and authorized personnel-only signs every 20 feet. The fresh scent of cut pine from new fence posts mixed sickeningly with the chemical odors now permanently hanging in the Colorado air. My paradise was becoming a toxic wasteland. But the real slap came when they stopped paying rent entirely. Current damages to the storage area offset any lease payments, Vivian's lawyer explained, in a letter that probably cost more to write than most people make in a week. They claimed I'd created unsafe conditions by attempting to access my own property, and that repair costs exceeded their monthly obligations. My equipment loans got called in early by a bank that had been happy to extend credit for 20 years. My commercial insurance was suddenly under review for unexplained policy violations. Even my electrical contractor's license faced investigation for complaints about substandard work I'd never actually performed. Vivian had corrupted every local institution that could protect me. While she flexed political connections, I conducted financial forensics that revealed the full scope of her criminal empire. Cross-referencing truck records with construction permits showed Mountain Peak had contracts for hazardous material removal from 37 luxury renovations across 3 counties. Their invoices totaled over $2.3 million in disposal fees. EPA-compliant disposal that never happened, because everything ended up dumped on my property for free. I'd stumbled onto the biggest environmental fraud in our state's history. My surveillance captured damning evidence daily. Workers dumping asbestos tiles behind Container 7. Lead paint chips piled next to my grandfather's cattle shelter. Industrial solvents leaking rainbow stains into soil where my family had grown hay for generations. But Vivian's biggest mistake was getting too comfortable with her perceived invincibility. During one midnight operation, my audio equipment captured her coordinating with someone on the phone. The EPA inspection is scheduled for Thursday. Make sure containers 12 through 15 are relocated to the back pasture before Wednesday night. We can't afford any visibility during the site visit. EPA inspection. She had advance warning of federal oversight. That's when I discovered the mini twist that would destroy her completely. Cross-referencing the phone number from that conversation revealed it belonged to Deputy Environmental Inspector Marcus Webb, Vivian's cousin, who worked for the State Environmental Agency. She wasn't just running an illegal dumping operation. She had inside information about every inspection, every investigation, every regulatory review that could threaten her scheme. The corruption went straight to the enforcement agencies supposed to stop her. But two could play the inside information game. My military buddy Jake worked for EPA Criminal Investigations in Denver. During a casual conversation about environmental compliance questions for my electrical business, I learned something that made my pulse race. Federal environmental crimes trigger automatic asset forfeiture. Everything purchased with illegal profits, houses, cars, bank accounts, business assets, gets seized by the government. Violators don't just face prison time, they lose everything they've ever owned. The personal cost was destroying my family. Emma came home crying after someone spray-painted "Toxic Waste Ezra" on her school locker. Grace got kicked off the debate team because the coach's wife lived in Pinnacle Heights and demanded her removal. Then Child Protective Services arrived at my door. We received multiple reports about unsafe living conditions, the social worker explained, her clipboard thick with anonymous complaints claiming hazardous materials endangered my daughters. The sick irony made my stomach churn. Vivian was using her own environmental crimes as weapons to steal my children. That night, sitting in my kitchen while illegal dumping continued outside my windows, I made the decision that would end this nightmare. I wasn't fighting this in corrupt local courts anymore. I was taking 18 months of evidence directly to federal agents who specialized in environmental crimes and didn't care about small-town political connections. The smell of coffee mixed with ozone from surveillance equipment as I organized evidence into packages that would expose every aspect of this criminal enterprise. Bank records proving financial fraud, construction permits showing deliberate violations, audio recordings of conspiracy, video footage of illegal dumping, soil tests confirming contamination, and most importantly, proof that a state environmental inspector was providing inside information to help criminals evade federal oversight. I stayed quiet and kept building my case, because when you're hunting wolves with federal badges, you don't howl until you're ready to call in the entire pack. Vivian thought local corruption made her untouchable. She was about to learn the difference between small-town politics and federal law enforcement. Everything changed on a Tuesday night in late September, when the biggest thunderstorm in 20 years rolled across the Colorado Rockies. I watched from my kitchen window as lightning split the sky like God's own anger, illuminating the steel containers that had stolen half my inheritance. The wind hit first, gusts over 70 miles per hour that bent fence posts like drinking straws, and sent debris flying across the valley like shrapnel. Then came the hail, chunks of ice the size of golf balls hammering container roofs with a sound like machine gun fire that echoed off the mountains my grandfather used to watch every sunrise. But it was the tornado-strength wind that did what 18 months of legal warfare couldn't accomplish. Container number 4, weakened by months of illegal modifications and criminal overloading, simply split open like a rotten fruit. The metal seams that someone had welded to install ventilation systems couldn't handle nature's fury. 20 tons of toxic waste spilled across my grandfather's pristine pasture in a toxic rainbow of chemicals, asbestos tiles, and contaminated debris. I pulled on my boots and rain jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped into what looked like an environmental apocalypse. The smell hit me first, a chemical cocktail that burned my nose and made my eyes water instantly. Industrial solvents mixed with decomposing asbestos insulation created an odor that belonged in a hazardous waste facility, not cattle ranch, where 3 generations of Thompsons had raised honest food under honest skies. My flashlight beam revealed the true scope of Vivian's criminal empire. Hundreds of bags of toxic waste scattered across acres of pasture that had fed my family's cattle for 70 years. Drums of industrial chemicals cracked open and bleeding into soil that would now require millions in professional remediation. Documents plastered against fence posts by the wind. EPA disposal certificates that even in the dark looked obviously forged. This wasn't just illegal dumping. This was the systematic destruction of everything my family had built. Then I heard Vivian's voice cutting through the storm like a banshee's wail. "Get everything cleaned up before sunrise. she screamed at workers who had materialized from nowhere, despite the 3 a.m. hour. "If anyone sees this, we're all finished." She stood in the middle of the toxic catastrophe, wearing designer rain gear that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, directing a cleanup operation like a general commanding desperate troops. Her perfectly coiffed hair was plastered to her skull, mascara running down her face in black streams that made her look like a raccoon caught raiding garbage cans. But this wasn't household storage scattered by Mother Nature. This was evidence of the biggest environmental crime in our state's history, exposed by weather that couldn't be bought, threatened, or legally manipulated by corrupt local officials. I stayed hidden behind my barn, heart pounding with a mixture of rage and vindication, documenting everything with night vision equipment I'd installed for exactly this moment. My cameras captured workers in hazmat suits, frantically stuffing contaminated materials back into damaged containers, Vivian directing the concealment of evidence that could send her entire criminal organization to federal prison for decades. Most importantly, my audio equipment recorded her panicked phone conversation with someone she called Marcus, undoubtedly her cousin at the state environmental agency. "The site inspection needs to be delayed immediately," she hissed into her phone, rain streaming down her face. "Equipment malfunction caused contamination exposure. Give us 48 hours to handle the situation before anyone official sees this." Equipment malfunction. A tornado was now an equipment malfunction in Vivian's twisted version of reality, where criminal responsibility could be rebranded as natural disasters. But 18 months of staying quiet and documenting everything had prepared me for exactly this moment. While Vivian scrambled to hide evidence that nature had exposed, I was uploading terabytes of surveillance footage to secure servers that federal agencies could access within hours. The storm had torn open more than containers. It had torn open the perfect criminal cover that protected environmental criminals who thought local corruption made them untouchable. Now it was time to prove them wrong. The morning after the storm, I sat in my kitchen with 18 months of evidence spread across the table like battle plans. Coffee steamed in my mug while I organized the most comprehensive criminal case our county had ever seen. The acrid smell of chemicals still hung in the air outside, but inside my house, justice was finally taking shape. My first call went to Jake Morrison, my old Army buddy who'd made it big with EPA criminal investigations in Denver. We'd served together in Afghanistan, where patience and preparation meant the difference between mission success and body bags. Jake understood the value of overwhelming evidence. "Ezra, what you're describing sounds like a massive RICO case." His voice carried that familiar military precision through the phone. "Environmental crimes this scope typically involve organized criminal enterprises. If you've got documentation proving conspiracy, we're talking federal charges that carry 20-year sentences." Federal charges, 20-year sentences, music to my ears. I learned something that made my pulse race with anticipation. Under federal asset forfeiture laws, everything purchased with criminal proceeds gets seized by the government. Vivian's $1 million Pinnacle Heights mansion, her silver Escalade, her husband's demolition company, their offshore accounts, all of it could be confiscated to pay for environmental cleanup and victim compensation. Criminals who thought they were getting rich were actually building their own financial execution. Jake connected me with Sarah Smith, an environmental prosecutor who specialized in complex fraud cases. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who'd sent white-collar criminals to federal prison for breakfast. "Mr. Thompson, what you've documented could be the largest environmental fraud case in Colorado history," she said during our encrypted video call. "If your evidence supports RICO charges, we're looking at asset forfeitures exceeding $10 million. $10 million. Enough to clean up my property, compensate every affected neighbor, and fund environmental protection for the entire valley." But timing was everything. Labor Day weekend was approaching, and Vivian had planned a massive community celebration to showcase Pinnacle Heights as a model development. She'd invited county commissioners, state environmental officials, real estate investors, and media representatives for a public tour of her successful community partnership. The guest list read like a who's who of people who could authorize massive development projects across Colorado. Vivian was using my contaminated property as a showpiece to attract more criminal opportunities. Perfect. Maximum witnesses for maximum impact. I coordinated with Jake to have federal agents positioned as interested investors during the celebration. Sarah Smith arranged for EPA criminal investigators to attend as environmental consultants. The Denver Post's investigative reporter would be there covering innovative rural development partnerships. My documentary filmmaker friend Marcus agreed to record everything, disguised as a freelance videographer hired for the event. Multiple cameras, professional audio equipment, live streaming capabilities that would broadcast Vivian's downfall to the internet in real time. The technical preparation required every electrical contractor skill I'd developed over 20 years. Hidden cameras and fake utility boxes, wireless microphones disguised as landscaping features, a mobile command center in my barn that could coordinate federal agencies, media coverage, and evidence distribution simultaneously. I installed soil testing equipment that would provide real-time contamination readings during the tour. When Vivian bragged about environmental stewardship, digital displays would show actual toxicity levels that made her property a Superfund site. The irony was delicious. She'd spent 18 months using my land for criminal storage. Now I was using her own celebration to expose every crime she'd committed. But the most important preparation was emotional. I moved Emma and Grace to stay with my sister in Denver, explaining that Dad has some business to finish that might get complicated. They'd been through enough trauma from this nightmare. The final confrontation needed to happen without risking their safety or forcing them to watch their father destroy someone who'd tormented our family. The smell of fresh printed evidence packets filled my barn as I prepared comprehensive documentation for every agency that would be present. Bank records proving financial fraud, construction permits showing systematic violations, audio recordings of conspiracy between Vivian and her corrupt cousin, video footage of illegal dumping spanning 18 months. Most importantly, soil contamination tests that proved environmental damage requiring federal Superfund designation, and criminal prosecution under laws that carried penalties severe enough to bankrupt entire criminal organizations. I created dead man switches that would automatically distribute evidence to media outlets and federal agencies if anything happened to me. Encrypted files stored in multiple cloud servers. Physical evidence secured in bank safety deposit boxes across 3 counties. Vivian might have corrupted local systems, but she couldn't corrupt federal agencies, national media, and the internet simultaneously. The morning of the celebration, I stood on my porch drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint my grandfather's mountains in colors that promised justice. 18 months of staying quiet, documenting crimes, and building an unshakable case were about to pay dividends that would echo across Colorado's environmental protection landscape for decades. I was ready to stop being the victim and start being the prosecutor. Vivian's desperation became obvious 2 weeks before her planned celebration, when she made increasingly erratic moves that screamed guilty conscience. The confident HOA president who'd spent 18 months terrorizing my family was being replaced by a panicked criminal who sensed walls closing in around her empire. It started with escalated sabotage attempts that showed how rattled she'd become. My cattle fence got cut 3 times in 1 week, forcing me to spend hours searching for animals that could wander onto highways and cause accidents. Someone tampered with my electrical panel, ironic choice given my profession, leaving obvious evidence that they had no idea what they were doing. The smell of burned wiring filled my garage when I discovered amateur attempts to create electrical fires that would have been laughable if they weren't criminally dangerous. Whoever Vivian hired for sabotage was about as competent as a blindfolded electrician working with wet hands. But her legal intimidation campaign reached new levels of desperation that revealed just how cornered she felt. Vivian filed a restraining order claiming I'd threatened her safety during an encounter at the grocery store where I'd simply nodded politely while buying milk. Her lawyer demanded emergency possession of the entire storage area, claiming I'd created imminent public safety hazards by existing on my own property. The paperwork felt expensive between my fingers. Thick legal letterhead that probably cost more per page than most people's hourly wages. They wanted $50,000 in damages, and my immediate eviction from property my family had owned for 70 years. Meanwhile, her community intimidation campaign revealed how deeply her corruption had spread through Pinnacle Heights. She organized safety patrols of HOA members who took shifts monitoring my house like prison guards watching an inmate. Anonymous flyers appeared throughout the subdivision, claiming I was dangerous to children and associated with toxic materials. The cruel irony made my stomach burn with acid. The woman who'd turned my property into a hazardous waste dump was using her own environmental crimes to paint me as the threat. But Vivian's biggest mistake was getting so desperate that she reached out to Marcus Webb, the security guard she'd hired to patrol the containers. Unknown to her, Marcus had approached me weeks earlier with information that would destroy her completely. Mini twist. Marcus revealed that Vivian hadn't paid his security company in 4 months, leaving guards unpaid while she spent money on lawyers and bribes. More importantly, he provided copies of security logs that proved systematic illegal dumping on specific dates and times that matched my surveillance footage perfectly. "She's planning something big for the celebration," Marcus warned me during a midnight meeting at a truck stop outside town. "Asked me to plant evidence in your barn the night before the event. Wants to have you arrested during the public tour for stealing HOA property." The plan was sickeningly predictable. Vivian would stage my arrest in front of county officials and media, portraying herself as the victim of a deranged neighbor who'd sabotaged her community improvement project. The planted evidence would justify seizing my entire property for investigation, while giving her time to relocate the most incriminating containers. But two could play the evidence planting game. I coordinated with Jake and Sarah Smith to turn Vivian's plan against her. When she planted stolen HOA property in my barn, federal agents would be watching with night vision equipment that captured every detail in admissible quality. Her crime would become additional evidence of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. The attempted bribery came 3 days before the celebration, delivered by Vivian's lawyer with an offer that revealed just how terrified she'd become. $100,000 cash, cancellation of all legal actions, and a non-disclosure agreement that would silence me permanently about everything I'd discovered. "My client recognizes this situation has become unnecessarily adversarial," the lawyer explained in my kitchen, his cologne mixing with the lingering chemical odors from outside. "She's prepared to compensate you generously for any inconvenience and help you relocate to a more suitable property." Relocate? They wanted to buy my silence and exile me from land that had been in my family since 1952. "Tell your client I'll consider her offer," I replied, keeping my voice steady while rage boiled in my chest. "I need some time to think about it. Time to think. Right. Time to add attempted witness tampering to the federal charges that were about to destroy her life." But the most revealing moment came when Vivian granted an interview to the local newspaper about her community transformation through strong leadership. She posed for photographs in front of the containers, talking about progress and prosperity, while standing on soil contaminated with enough toxins to qualify for Superfund cleanup. "Sometimes you have to deal with stubborn elements that resist positive change," she told the reporter, her fake smile gleaming in professional lighting. "But persistence and proper legal channels always prevail." Persistence and proper legal channels. Federal prosecutors were going to love that quote during her sentencing hearing. The trap was set, evidence compiled, federal agents positioned, media coordinated. Vivian thought she was hosting a celebration of her criminal success. She was actually planning her own public execution. The week before her celebration, Vivian made moves so desperate they bordered on panic-induced stupidity. She filed an emergency injunction to prevent my access to the storage area during the event, claiming my presence would create security risks during official inspections. Armed private security appeared overnight, hired from a Denver company that specialized in asset protection for wealthy clients facing legal troubles. The mercenaries, because that's what they were, patrolled my property like occupation forces, treating the land my grandfather built as enemy territory, requiring military-style control. Their tactical gear and automatic weapons seemed excessive for guarding household storage, but perfectly appropriate for protecting a criminal enterprise worth millions. But Vivian's masterstroke of criminal stupidity came when she decided to relocate the most incriminating containers during the celebration itself. While guests toured the successful community partnership, trucks would quietly move evidence to a backup location in Wyoming, where her husband had purchased land under a shell company. She was planning to commit federal crimes in front of federal agents who were attending specifically to arrest her for federal crimes. The irony was so perfect, it felt like divine justice. My surveillance equipment captured her coordination meetings with truck drivers, who clearly understood they were participating in something illegal. The conversations revealed transportation routes, timing schedules, and destination coordinates that federal prosecutors would use to build conspiracy charges against every participant. Mini twist. During one recorded phone call, Vivian revealed the true scope of her ambitions. The Colorado operation was just a pilot program. If successful, she planned to expand the illegal dumping scheme to 5 western states, using HOAs throughout the region as fronts for hazardous waste storage on private property. Colorado proves the concept works, her voice carried clearly through my wireless microphones. Rural property owners are desperate enough to sign anything, and local officials are cheap enough to buy. We can scale this to handle waste disposal for the entire construction industry. Scale this. She was planning to turn environmental crime into a regional business empire that would destroy thousands of acres across the American West. The personal attacks escalated to levels that would have been funny if they weren't so vicious. Anonymous social media accounts posted doctored photos showing me vandalizing containers, claiming I was an environmental terrorist who threatened community safety. Fake reviews flooded online sites, alleging my electrical work had caused house fires and endangered families. My daughters faced harassment so severe that their school counselor called to discuss safety concerns about continued enrollment. Someone had created fake social media profiles using Emma and Grace's names to post messages supporting toxic waste disposal and environmental destruction. The psychological warfare was designed to isolate me from community support and discredit any accusations I might make against Pinnacle Heights leadership. If Ezra Thompson was a dangerous lunatic, then his claims about environmental crimes could be dismissed as delusional fantasies. But the most audacious move was Vivian's attempted bribery escalation. Her lawyer returned with an improved offer, $200,000, guaranteed jobs for my daughters, and a house in a more suitable location that would remove us from Colorado entirely. Mrs. Blackwood recognizes your family's attachment to this property, he explained, while sweat beaded on his forehead despite cool weather. She's prepared to ensure your daughters receive full college scholarships and help you establish an electrical contracting business in Arizona. Arizona, far from federal investigators who might ask inconvenient questions about what I'd witnessed in Colorado. The desperation was obvious in every word. Vivian understood that my silence was worth more than my property, more than my business, more than anything except her freedom from federal prison. I'll give you my answer at the celebration, I told him, knowing that answer would come in the form of federal agents reading her constitutional rights. But Vivian's hubris reached its peak when she granted a television interview about her innovative approach to rural development. Standing in front of containers filled with toxic waste, she discussed plans for a regional recycling center that would bring prosperity to agricultural communities throughout the West. The interviewer asked about local opposition to her projects. Some people resist progress, Vivian replied with that plastic smile I'd learned to hate. But when you're transforming entire communities for the better, you can't let small-minded thinking stop necessary change. Small-minded thinking. Resisting the transformation of family farms into illegal toxic waste dumps was small-minded thinking, according to a woman who'd committed environmental crimes that would require decades to remediate. Federal prosecutors were going to play that interview during every stage of her trial. The final preparations were complete, evidence packages distributed to multiple agencies, media positioned for maximum coverage, federal agents ready to execute warrants that would seize everything Vivian owned and send her to prison for most of her remaining life. She thought she was hosting a celebration of criminal success that would launch a regional empire. She was actually throwing a party for her own destruction, with federal law enforcement providing the entertainment. Labor Day weekend arrived with perfect Colorado weather. Clear blue skies, mountain air crisp with the promise of autumn, and not a cloud to mar Vivian's community celebration. Over 200 guests gathered on my property for what she'd billed as a showcase of innovative rural development partnerships. County commissioners arrived in official vehicles. State environmental officials wore their best suits. Real estate investors carried briefcases full of expansion plans. Local media set up cameras to document the success story that would serve as a template for developments across the West. Vivian stood at the center of it all, wearing a designer white suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, microphone in hand, beaming with the confidence of someone who believed corruption had made her untouchable. "Today marks a milestone in community cooperation," she announced to the crowd gathered around container number 1. "What you see here represents the future of responsible development that benefits everyone." Responsible development. Standing on soil contaminated with enough toxins to qualify for Superfund cleanup, while describing environmental crimes as community benefits. The first crack in her perfect facade came when Deputy Marcus Webb, her cousin who'd been providing inside information, approached with an arrest warrant. This was the moment she'd planned to frame me with planted evidence, but federal agents had been monitoring the property since dawn. "Ezra Thompson, you're under arrest for theft of HOA property," Marcus announced loudly enough for every guest to hear. I calmly pulled out my phone and started recording. "I'd like to see that warrant, Deputy, and I'd like these witnesses to know that you're about to make an arrest based on evidence that was planted in my barn last night by the very people who hired you." The crowd murmured with confusion as I played high-definition footage of Vivian's people sneaking into my barn at 2 a.m. Marcus's face drained of color as he realized the trap had been sprung on him instead of me. That's when Jake Morrison stepped out of the crowd, federal credentials gleaming in the morning sun. "I'm Agent Morrison, EPA Criminal Investigations." His voice carried the authority of federal law enforcement that doesn't get intimidated by local politics. "We're conducting a criminal investigation into violations of federal environmental protection statutes." The murmur became a buzz of nervous energy as federal agents positioned throughout the crowd revealed their identities. Guests who'd come to celebrate Vivian's success found themselves witnesses to the biggest environmental crime bust in Colorado history. "There must be some mistake," Vivian protested, her voice climbing toward the shrill register that meant panic was setting in. "These containers hold household storage items from community renovations." That's when we opened container number 4. Federal agents used bolt cutters to remove the new locks Vivian had installed after the storm. The metallic screech of cutting metal silenced the crowd as everyone pressed closer to see what household items required industrial-grade security. The smell hit them first, chemical fumes so toxic that people in the front row started backing away immediately. Then came the visual evidence that made county commissioners reach for their phones and state officials demand immediate explanations. Asbestos tiles spilled out like toxic confetti. Drums of industrial solvents leaked rainbow stains onto grass that would never again be safe for cattle. Bags of lead paint chips and contaminated debris created a toxic landscape that belonged in a hazardous waste facility, not a family ranch. Clear evidence tags showed materials had come from luxury renovations throughout 3 counties. Forged EPA disposal certificates fluttered in the breeze like criminal confessions written in official letterhead. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the crowd through a microphone that Sarah Smith, the federal prosecutor, had provided. "For 18 months, my property has been used as an illegal toxic waste dump. I stayed quiet and documented every crime, while building the evidence that federal agents are now using to prosecute the largest environmental fraud case in our state's history." Vivian's meltdown was spectacular. "He knew what was in there. He signed the storage agreement. This is all his fault." I calmly played audio recordings of her directing illegal dumping operations and coordinating with her corrupt cousin to avoid EPA inspections. Her own voice condemning her, while federal agents read constitutional rights to everyone involved in the criminal conspiracy. "The EPA whistleblower reward for this case will fund college scholarships for local students," I continued, as handcuffs clicked onto Vivian's wrists. "This land will become an environmental education center after professional cleanup removes every trace of contamination." The Denver Post reporter live-streamed everything as federal agents began the largest asset forfeiture operation in county history. Bank accounts frozen, vehicles impounded, the Pinnacle Heights development itself seized as evidence of criminal enterprise. Vivian Blackwood, who'd spent 18 months terrorizing my family and destroying my grandfather's legacy, was loaded into a federal transport vehicle while 200 witnesses watched justice being served with mountain air and morning sunshine. Sometimes patience pays compound interest. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my porch, drinking coffee that tastes like victory, watching the sunrise paint my grandfather's mountains in colors that promise hope instead of dread. The chemical smell is gone, replaced by the honest scent of pine and clean soil that took a team of federal environmental specialists 4 months to restore. Vivian Blackwood is serving 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to 47 charges, including RICO violations, environmental crimes, mail fraud, and conspiracy. Her husband Robert got 12 years for running the demolition company that made the illegal dumping possible. Deputy Marcus Webb lost his job, his pension, and got 3 years for corruption and obstruction of justice. The asset forfeiture was everything federal prosecutors had promised, and more. Vivian's million-dollar mansion, her husband's entire demolition company, their offshore accounts, luxury vehicles, and investment properties, all of it seized to pay for environmental cleanup and victim compensation. The final tally exceeded $12 million, making it the largest environmental crime asset forfeiture in Colorado history. My EPA whistleblower reward totaled $1.2 million, which I used to establish the Sarah Thompson Memorial Scholarship Fund for rural students studying environmental science. Emma and Grace help select recipients each year, continuing their mother's legacy of helping others, while honoring the land that raised our family. The first 5 scholarship winners included children from both old farming families and former Pinnacle Heights residents. Proof that environmental protection unites communities instead of dividing them. Young people who might never have afforded college are now studying to become the next generation of environmental guardians. My property has been transformed into something Sarah would have loved. The Colorado Environmental Education Center occupies the space where shipping containers once sat, featuring a solar-powered visitor center that teaches sustainable farming practices to school groups from across the region. Interactive displays show how environmental crimes get investigated and prosecuted, using our case as a real-world example of citizen action making a difference. The restoration was miraculous. Professional cleanup teams removed every trace of contamination, installed monitoring wells to ensure groundwater protection, and replanted native grasses that now wave in mountain breezes like green flags of victory. My cattle graze safely again, on land that will be monitored for environmental health for the next 50 years. Emma and Grace returned home as heroes instead of victims. Emma's valedictorian speech included a section about courage under pressure and fighting for what's right. Grace started an environmental club at school that monitors local water quality and advocates for stronger protections against corporate pollution. My electrical contracting business has expanded into renewable energy installations, helping ranchers and farmers throughout the valley reduce their environmental impact while saving money on utility bills. The irony is sweet. Skills I used to document environmental crimes now help prevent them. The community healing has been remarkable. Old farming families and new residents work together on environmental protection initiatives that ensure what happened to my property never happens again. Property values increased after the cleanup because buyers want to live in communities that take environmental stewardship seriously. But the most satisfying outcome has been watching federal environmental protection expand throughout the region. Our case became a model for investigating similar crimes, leading to prosecutions in 4 other states and new regulations that make it much harder for criminals to use rural properties for illegal waste disposal. Last week, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. Dear Mr. Thompson, you inspired me to fight my own HOA nightmare involving illegal activities. Your story gave me courage to contact federal authorities about problems in my Florida retirement community. The fight continues. Environmental criminals are still out there, still looking for isolated properties and desperate landowners they can exploit. But now there are more people willing to document crimes, contact federal agencies, and prove that patience and evidence can defeat corruption that seems impossible to overcome. Every week I hear from people trapped in similar situations. HOA presidents embezzling funds, property managers hiding environmental crimes, corrupt officials enabling fraud that destroys communities and families.
Arista's drinking his morning coffee again, looking out at clean Colorado pastures where 15 shipping containers used to sit. 8 years for Vivian. 12 million seeds from a criminal empire. But here's the thing that sticks with me. 18 months. 18 months, Earth stayed quiet while Vivian Blackwood turned his family ranch into an illegal toxic waste dump, charging clients $2.3 million for proper disposal that never happened. Then that September storm tore open Container 4, spilled her environmental crimes across his grandfather's land for the whole world to see. Vivian thought HOA president power could crush a small-town rancher. She didn't know this electrician had military training and the patience to document every federal crime she committed. While she posed for photos bragging about community partnership, Ursa was feeding evidence to EPA investigators. Mountain Peak demolition gone. Vivian's mansion seized. Her corrupt cousin at the Environmental Agency, 3 years in federal prison. The Sarah Thompson Memorial Scholarships are funding 5 local kids' education now. That contaminated land became an environmental education center. Question for you. If your HOA wants temporary storage on your property, are you signing immediately or investigating first? Drop a comment. This is happening everywhere. If patience and documentation beat corruption in your book, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Sometimes the quietest neighbor is gathering the loudest evidence.